Alright, so this Sunday, January 14th, we have UFC Fight Night 124. It's going to be headlined by Dooho Choi and Jeremy Stephens. Now, this is a decent card from top to bottom. There's some pretty entertaining fights on this card. And this is the official first card of 2018. I didn't get to make a video of the last card of 2017, which was a UFC 219. Holly Holm and Chris Cyborg, being busy with work and things like that. So for this year, one major thing that I am striving for is to be more consistent in terms of uploading content, specifically these UFC card predictions. Now, I just really want this channel to grow. I want to use this, YouTube channel as a platform to be able to voice my opinion, on these UFC predictions and UFC topics, and not necessarily just MMA topics, but, other sports in general as well. And not only do I want to use this channel as a platform to voice my opinion, but also to hear your guys' opinions in the comment section. I wish to eventually bring some subscribers on the show to make predictions with me or to make fight picks with me, collaborate with other small YouTubers and just continue to grow, continue to make this channel, the content on this channel enjoyable, and continue to bring good content to you guys. And also make sure to let me know in the comments down below how I can make this channel better, how I can improve, this channel. Let me know what you want to see more of, what you don't want to see, what you want me to try, to make videos on, more interviews with fighters and things like that. If any of you have any ideas, just feel free to let me know. You guys can leave a comment down below. You guys can follow me on Twitter and send me a direct message there. Just let me know how I can make this channel better, because I am really open to any ideas on how to make the content I upload much more entertaining, because with entertainment and with improvement comes growth. So, just make sure to let me know if you guys have any ideas. But with that being said, let's start off the new year with my UFC Fight Night 124 main card predictions. Now, the first fight on this card is a welterweight bout between Kamaru Usman and Emil. Now, Emil made his UFC debut back at UFC 206. Now, that is over a year ago. That is back, I think it was December 10th of 2016. So it's been well over a year since he made his UFC debut. He made it against Jordan Meehan. It was a decent performance. I mean, right off the bat, both guys were swinging. Meehan landed a couple takedowns, landed a couple shots on the feet. He was out landing them in the first round. And the second and third round is when Meek kind of turned it up a notch, got a couple takedowns, was landing a bit more on the feet in the striking exchanges, and he has pretty good striking. He's very athletic, very, very fast, and very strong. Like I said, he was able to get me into the ground a couple times, showed really good wrestling, was able to lay on top, landed a couple shots on the ground, was able to keep me down. And it was a decent performance. He came away with a decision victory in that fight in his UFC debut, so that leaves him 1-0 in the UFC. And as the fight went on, he did look a little bit gassed out, I guess, because at the beginning of the fight, it did start off at kind of a fast pace. Both guys were landing shots and throwing punches. And yet, although it wasn't the best performance, it was still a good win, a solid win, for a guy making his UFC debut, a young guy like Emil, going up against a guy like Jordan Meehan, who's been around for a while. He has over 40 professional fights, in his MMA career. So, I mean, the guy's been around for quite some time. He knows a thing or two. So it was a solid victory for Emil. But for this fight, he's going up against a guy, Kamaru Usman, who's looking to make a splash in the welterweight division. Now, he's a guy that's waiting to make his mark, waiting for an opportunity to fight somebody that would allow him to climb up the welterweight rankings. Now, this guy is ranked number 10 for a reason, because he's talented, because I do see that he has power in his hands, because he is a great wrestler, and because of the pressure he puts in every single fight that he's in. He's a hard worker, and he's a very talented athlete, a very talented fighter. Now, the only thing is that the reason why he is not ranked higher, the only reason why I don't see how many people are thinking that he's going to be the next champion, is because he hasn't really proven himself. If you look at the lineups, I think he's 6-0 in the UFC. If you look at his previous opponents, I'm not sure any of them are even ranked. And still, in this fight, Emil is only fighting for his second time in the UFC. He's not ranked. So, I mean, Usman is a guy that knows how to fight, obviously, right? He's a very good fighter, very well-rounded. But he's called out quite a few people in the welterweight division. He's called out Rafael dos Anjos, who is probably next in line for a title shot. He's called out Colby Covington, who is now ranked inside the top 5. So he's called out some bigger names in this division. The fights have just not happened. Therefore, he has not gotten the fight, or the kind of fight to prove whether or not he is a legitimate fighter in this weight class. Now, he claims that these other fighters are scared to fight him or are afraid of him because of how strong he is and because of how dominant he has looked in previous fights. But I think that a lot of these people aren't really sure that he is a fighter that can bring in numbers, you know, obviously because he's not the biggest name. He hasn't proven himself. So I think that's one of the main reasons why guys like Dos Anjos and Colby Covington and some of these other top contenders have kind of shied away from fighting him, because he is a rather unknown name to casual fans, of course. Now, as for this fight against Emil Meek, I just think that Kamaru Usman is going to be a bit too much. His wrestling, right, is really good. He's very strong. He's very persistent, and he as soon as the bell rings, right, he's in front of your face. He's putting pressure. He's looking to get the takedown. Now, his boxing skills aren't that good, right? He has power in his hands, as you saw, you know, when he knocked out Sergio Moraes. But his boxing skills aren't that good. He tends to swing a bit too wide, leaves himself vulnerable to counter punches. So that's going to be something that Emil Meek is going to have to look, you know, to take advantage of, is being able to counter, being able to be patient, wait till Usman overextends on a hook or an overhand and try to catch him. And also, Usman has the tendency to fight very low with his right leg really out, or his lead leg really out. You know, it's vulnerable to leg kicks. So that's something that Emil Meek is going to have to take advantage of if he wants to have an opportunity to win this fight. He's going to have to do everything in his power to stay away from the cage, because that's what Usman is going to try to do. He's going to try to get him against the cage, look for the takedown, you know, ground and pound him, look for a submission, hold him down, and just do everything he can to hold Emil Meek down and not allow him, you know, to get back up, because I do think that Meek is probably the better striker. He's probably the more accurate striker, you know, but I just think that it's a matter of who's going to come in here and who's going to implement their game plan the best and who's going to dominate. And I do think that's going to be Kamaru Usman. I do think he's going to take Emil Meek down with rather ease. I think he's going to hold him down, and I think he's going to ground and pound his way to a unanimous decision victory. Now, next up, we have a women's flyweight bout between Paige VanZant and Jessica Rose Clark. Now, Paige VanZant is coming off of a year layoff, just like Emil Meek. She hasn't fought since December of 2016. You know, and the last time she stepped inside the octagon, she got choked out by Michelle Waterson. So she lost that fight and she hasn't fought since. Now, this is going to be her debut in the new division, the women's flyweight division. Now, Paige VanZant has lost 2 of her last 3 fights. She currently has a record of 4-2 inside the UFC. She's very talented, you know, and I think that when she first, you know, bursted onto the scene in the UFC, Dana White, Sean Shelby, and all them folks were really pushing for Paige VanZant to become a household name, because she has the looks, you know, she has the character, she's very likable, and she has a big fan base. But in terms of skill set and consistency and being able to not get wins in the UFC, she just hasn't, you know, lived up to the hype or what many people thought she was going to be. Now, she comes from Team Alpha Male. Obviously, she's no longer there anymore, but the foundation, the fundamentals that she comes from, you know, they're there. So she, you know, she's a very talented fighter. She's very young. There's still, you know, a lot of room to grow, you know, in a young fighter like Paige VanZant. So she's looking to get back into the win column. And this is a new division for her. You know, she's going to be fighting in a different division. She's going to look at it as an opportunity to start over, you know, and another chance to be able to climb up the rankings and perhaps eventually fight for the title. Now, in front of her is Jessica Rose Clark. And Jessica Rose Clark just recently made her UFC debut back in November. I believe it was November 17th. She made her UFC debut against Bec Rawlings, and Bec Rawlings is a tough fighter. She's very scrappy. She's a really good striker, pretty good boxing, power in her hands as well. So it was a tough fight for both girls. It was a very exciting fight. Both women were landing shots back and forth. It was Bec Rawlings who was outlanding her in the first round, got a takedown. But Rose Clark, for it being her UFC debut, was really poised, showed maturity inside the octagon, was able to reverse the situation, was eventually on top in the first round. And in the second and third round, it was actually Jessica Rose Clark who was outlanding, who was pushing the pace, who was pushing forward. Although they were both landing and it was a very close fight, I do think that Jessica Rose Clark did enough to notch that decision, or to come away with that decision. It was a split decision, so it was a very, very close fight, a very entertaining fight, but it was a scrap, you know, and I really was impressed by Rose Clark's conditioning. You know, as much action, as much punches as they were throwing, you know, as many kicks as they were throwing, she was still bouncing around as if it was the first round. So she's in excellent shape. Just by that fight alone, you can see that she takes this sport very seriously, and she comes in prepared. Now, for Paige VanZant, she's going to have to come in this fight and push the pace. She's going to have to push the pace and pressure Paige VanZant from the minute the fight starts to the minute it ends, because VanZant does not like pressure. There were at times in the fight, in the Michelle Waterson fight, where Waterson would land a jab or a hook or an uppercut, and VanZant would kind of freeze, or her reactions were a bit slow. Waterson was outlanding her on the feet, looked way more fluent in her movements. you know, and was outlanding her, and eventually was able to get her to the ground and submitted her via rear naked choke. Now, the thing with VanZant is that she does not like to be pressured. She folds under pressure. You know, she does a good job of moving around, but in terms of being able to move her head and being able to counterpunch and things like that, she's not too good at it. Obviously, there's room to improve there. So I think that if Rose Clark comes out and pressures, you know, and tries to make the fight scrappy and tries to get in her face and you know, just make it a dirty fight, she's going to have a real chance to win this fight. Now, for VanZant, she's just going to have to be patient, continue to move around, you know, make Rose Clark miss and pick her shots from the outside. And maybe even look to get the fight to the ground. Now, she is a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She does come from Team Alpha, like I said earlier. You know, there's a couple guys there that are really good on the ground, like Uriah Faber. She may have the advantage on the ground, although we haven't seen much of Jessica Rose Clark's ground game. That may be one option that Paige VanZant may take into consideration to try and get this victory and get another win under her belt, get back into the win column and gain some confidence. Now, I'm just not sure it's going to go down that way. I think that Rose Clark is confident right now. And not only that, but she's been more active than Paige VanZant. So, you know, I'm going to look for Rose Clark to come in, put pressure right away, outlander. I think the speed advantage is going to be very clear in Jessica Rose Clark's favor. You know, so I think she's going to do enough on the feet. She's an outlander. I think she's going to make it a dirty, scrappy fight, and she's going to come away with the unanimous decision victory. Now, next up, we have the main event of the evening, a real barn burner between two top 15 featherweights in Dooho Choi and Jeremy Stephens. Now, Dooho Choi, right, it was coming off of only his second professional loss and his first loss inside the UFC in his last fight against Cub Swanson. Now, Cub Swanson, as we all know, is one of the premier featherweights in the division, right? He's been around for a long time. He's been a title contender, you know, for a good amount of his career. You know, he's very experienced, very well-rounded, power in his hands, fast hands, really good ground game, really good wrestling, you know, just a student of the game, right? And has been that way for quite some time. So when Dooho Choi took that fight against Cub Swanson, in my opinion, I knew right off the bat that he had bitten off more than he can chew, because he had not even stepped inside the octagon with a ranked opponent, you know, let alone a guy ranked inside the top 5. But going into that fight, Dooho Choi was given a legitimate shot to be able to win that fight. I mean, he had won his first 3 fights, all of them by knockout in the first round. So he definitely has power in his hands, you know, but in that fight, Swanson was just too much, right? He was too experienced, wobbled him a couple times, was close to finishing the fight, especially late in the 3rd round. It looked like they were going to stop the fight. The ref was going to jump in and stop the fight because Dooho Choi seriously took a beating in that fight. Now, there was a couple of moments in that fight where Dooho Choi did land and he did wobble Cub Swanson. It was when Swanson was opening up, looking to finish the fight when Dooho Choi was against the cage. Choi, you know, let one go, and it caught Cub Swanson, and it did wobble him, but he was never really close to finishing Swanson the way Swanson was close to finishing him on multiple occasions. But I do cut Superboy some slack because of the level of opponent that he was going up against. You know, I don't think he was ready for a fight like that, but he took it out of pride and because he was confident that he could win the fight. Obviously, it didn't go down that way. You know, so I'm cutting him some slack. I do think that he's very talented. Obviously, he has power in both of his hands, a really good uppercut, and he's very technical. You know, although he has power, although he's knocked 3 out of his last 4 opponents out, he doesn't just, you know, throw haymakers all the time. He's not just consistently headhunting. You know, he picks his shots. You know, he's very fundamentally sound. He has good footwork. You know, all right head movement. He does get hit quite a bit. His defense isn't all too good, you know, but his boxing skills are superb, you know. And like I said, he has power. I haven't really seen too much of his grappling. I do know that he has decent ground game, you know, or above average ground game, but I don't think that he's going to utilize it in this fight. I think that he's excited to take on a guy like Jeremy Stephens, who is another veteran, who is another guy that has stepped inside with some of the top fighters in the featherweight division, like Frankie Edgar, Cub Swanson, very experienced. Now, in his last fight, he welcomed Gilbert Melendez to the featherweight division. Now, Melendez was a former 155-pounder. That weight cut, I do think that it did drain him quite a bit, you know, and Stephens took advantage of it. Stephens took advantage of the fact that Melendez was leaving his lead leg out there to be chopped up, and Stephens did a tremendous job of landing leg kick after leg kick and was just abusing the lead leg of Melendez, and eventually it gave out. There was a couple times where Stephens landed some leg kicks and Melendez had to throw himself on the floor, you know, because his leg was giving out in front of him. You know, and I think that once Jeremy Stephens saw, you know, that Melendez was having a hard time taking those leg kicks, and once he saw that Melendez was having a hard time moving and he was becoming a stationary target, that's when Stephens opened up, you know, on the feet, you know, with his boxing, was throwing a couple combinations, landed a couple times, and although he did eat a couple shots, he was never really hurt. But he did do a good job of game planning for that Melendez fight because his legs were already damaged from the Edson Barbosa fight. So he did show, what an experienced fighter, right, brings to the table in terms of being able to come up with the right game plan, the proper game plan for specific opponents. Now, the fact of the matter is that Jeremy Stephens has power. He's one of the hardest hitters in that division. Now, I don't want to sit here and say that he's a really good boxer because his techniques aren't that good. He does have a tendency to headhunt. He does have a tendency to throw punches with tons of power behind it, resulting in him eventually getting tired as the fight goes on. But he does have power. His leg kicks have power. His jabs have power. His hooks and uppercuts obviously have power. This guy is looking to knock you out, and he's looking to do nothing else. Although he's a good wrestler, although he has an underrated ground game, he doesn't really look to utilize that because he wants to stand toe-to-toe. He wants to put up a show, and he really believes that he can knock anybody out. And that is one of the reasons why this is going to be an exciting fight, because both these guys like to stand and bang. Now, in terms of who's going to win this fight, I do think that Stephens has a legitimate shot to win this fight, because of his power. Although he's not as good a boxer as Dooho Choi, I just think that if Choi got wobbled and hurt the way he did against Swanson, who doesn't have nearly the same power as Jeremy Stephens, then a punch from Stephens can really hurt Choi and can really put him in some serious danger early on in the fight, especially. Now, the reason why I also hesitate to pick Jeremy Stephens is because of Dooho Choi's boxing abilities. He does have really, really sound techniques, very fundamentally sound with his boxing skills. I do think that if anyone can pick somebody apart in this fight, I do think it could be Dooho Choi. Because like I said, he doesn't headhunt the way Jeremy Stephens does. He doesn't expend as much energy as Jeremy Stephens does with every shot. Now, he was gassed in the Cub Swanson fight, but that's because it was a war. He had taken tons of punches. Swanson had taken a good amount of punches as well. So it would take a complete animal to not be gassed out after a fight like that. But I do think it's going to come down to who's more patient in this fight. If Dooho Choi can stay patient and make Jeremy Stephens kind of chase him the way Renato Moicano did, the way Frankie Edgar did, because Jeremy Stephens does not like to chase people down. He wants you to stand in front of him, and he wants you to take his best shot. He dares you to take his best shot. He doesn't like people who fight, at range, at a good distance. He doesn't like people who use the jab. He doesn't like people who chop the leg up, because he does lean heavily on his lead leg. Now, that is what it's going to come down to, is can Dooho Choi kind of fight the way Moicano did and the way Frankie Edgar did, and move around consistently, and keep out of harm's way in those killer hooks that Jeremy Stephens throws. I'm just not sure if he has that in him, because he doesn't really move as well as some of these other guys. So that's why this is a tough fight to pick. But I think that at the end of the day, I'm going to trust Dooho Choi's boxing skills. I do think he's going to come up with a better game plan. I think he's going to land more. I think he's going to pick his shots better. I think he's going to land more consistent as well. And I do think that Dooho Choi is going to land a shot that is going to hurt Jeremy Stephens. Now, let me just say this really quick, though, is I would not be surprised if they hurt each other. I would not be surprised if both fighters are close to finishing the fight at any point in the fight. These styles match up to where this fight is going to end in no other way but a TKO or a knockout. And it's just a matter of who's going to land the shot, because neither of them move very much. So there's no clear favorite in my eyes. I can't sit here and be confident that Dooho Choi is going to win. I can't sit here and be confident that Jeremy Stephens is going to win. I just think that if Dooho Choi does a good job of making Stephens miss early, it's going to tire him out. And as the later the fight goes on, Dooho Choi is going to have a better chance to land one, and I think he is. Therefore, I'm going to pick Dooho Choi to win this fight via TKO in the 3rd round. Now, if you like these predictions, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below who you think is going to win in this main event.